Thank you all for joining. I've got a great set of attendees today as we dive into this webinar on CyberFire, which is our MDR platform and service. Threat detection is a key weapon in the fight against cybercrime, particularly as it's a matter of when, not if. We need to be able to detect threats that breach our security controls that we've put in place. And sadly, it is absolutely impossible for us to block and protect against every single attack. So hence why it is a matter of when, not if, that a breach will occur. And it's how we respond. And the only way we can respond to those breaches if we're able to detect them, analyze them, and then look at how we can contain, mitigate, and then we can move into response and recover. But security monitoring is definitely not easy to get right. And there are some pitfalls and there are some challenges with how we implement this and how we get the very best out of our detection capabilities. And we're going to touch upon some of those today. But thankfully, there is a solution, and this is CyberFire. CyberFire is our turnkey dedicated MDR service and platform that we're extending out to the whole of EMEA that we've recently launched. So today I'm joined by Brian Martin. Brian is our Director of Product Management at Integrity360. Brian is a seasoned senior product leader with over 25 years under his belt, guiding strategic planning, business innovation, product development in the B2B sector, technologies and services sector. Brian has deep knowledge in both the market and the technical elements of cybersecurity, and also, including from his previous experience, telecoms, networking, IT, and software. In recent years, Brian has led the development of our threat detection and response portfolio, and also widening our threat exposure and management services. So thank you very much, and welcome, Brian.
Hi, everyone. Glad you could join us.
Thank you. So let's look at the agenda and what we're going to cover today. So in terms of our agenda, I'm going to start looking at some of those security monitoring challenges and really what the status quo is when we look at SOC and MDR services. Then I'm going to hand over to Brian, and Brian is going to walk through our CyberFire MDR service and its objectives, view of the service, importantly, our detection engineering and how that really makes the service effective, how we respond and the extent of our response, and then touching on the platform, the reporting, and what we can do optionally, and also the pricing models. So then I'm going to just summarize, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please jump into the Q&A panel and ask away, and we will answer those at the end. So let's kick off. So let's look at our security monitoring challenges, and part of that is looking at where you are on your journey when it comes to SOC and MDR. So we look at the challenges, security monitoring challenges that we see, and the questions, I guess, that we can ask are, does your SOC or SIEM generate too many alerts? Alert fatigue, is a real thing. It is something that is quite often talked about. We've seen it in many examples where our incident response team has been called in to help with an organization and where they've invested in the right technologies, and although they've detected the threat, they've sent those alerts off to a mailbox with a rule to automatically set those to red, and they're ignored, so losing that investment. And that can apply to security monitoring capabilities and technologies, whether that's across your SOC or within your SIEM. And then also, if we look at some of the commercial elements, is your SOC and SIEM priced and charged on events per second or gigabytes per day? So not having any certainty in what your charge is going to be, particularly when we look at cloud platforms that are charged on demand, where you haven't got that comfort that your spend on your SOC and SIEM capabilities is going to be predictable, linear at all. Do you monitor and respond to cybersecurity events 24/7? So do you have the team in place to be able to, when the threats are detected, and when we detect a threat, really we're starting at the point where it's an alert, and can we 24/7 around the clock be able to turn that alert into an investigation, and then once we've understood whether it's an incident, then actually respond to contain. We also need to think about, do we have visibility across the cybersecurity technology stack? And actually, extending that out further, not just our technology, our cybersecurity platforms, but making sure that we have wide visibility across the entire environment. And then we need to think about the people. People are hugely important. There isn't a full technology solution. Even in the days of AI, we can't hand off responsibility entirely to technology. So, do we have the analysts and the resources? And it's important to actually call out that we also need to think about not just having the analysts in terms of bodies, but also the experience and skills. So they're the security monitoring challenges. If we move on to really looking at the status quo, and we can look at that in terms of two SOC scenarios. So if we look at the first SOC scenario, as an organization, you're trying to build, or you're building or maturing your own SOC. So building an internal SOC function. Some of the pitfalls that we see, that the majority of SIEM platforms, which a SOC will be based around, are expensive in terms of the licensing, particularly when we look at where those models around EPS, around gigabytes per second, particularly when it's on demand, that can scale significantly. We'll see that alerts lack context to be able to understand, well, actually, the alert that's being generated, is it important? What's actually involved as part of that alert? So our starting point is where it needs to be. We look at the volumes of alerts. I talked about that alert fatigue earlier, but quite commonly, we'll see that there'll be tens to hundreds of alerts per day, which can very quickly swamp an internal security team. And we look at SIEM log source issues. If we're basing our security monitoring and SOC capability around SIEM, around log sources feeding into that, quite often we can see those being stuck that aren't reporting in, again, losing that visibility. And all of those issues are compounded that, regardless of the organization size, typically the security team and the security operations team is small, which then affects that 24/7. So that's scenario one, looking at how we can build and mature your own SOC. Scenario number two is very much looking at, well, you've already outsourced your SOC. Commonly outsourcing it to a SOC or MSS provider, so sometimes not being security focused. And some of those challenges that we see is that, again, we're looking at dozens of alerts per day that are being provided to you as an organization, that are being thrown over the fence for you to deal with. And part of that is that a lot of those that are being generated and investigated, sometimes with limited investigation by SOC providers, can quite often, mostly and mainly be false positives. Where those alerts do arrive and are provided, and it's not a false positive, one of the challenges that those alerts lack context, which means as an organization, if you're being provided with an alert that lacks the context that's needed, then it's extremely difficult to be able to understand the impact, potentially the severity, but also importantly, how to respond, and if you need to respond. When we look at reporting, quite often those reports are very verbose. They're not targeted. The reports provided are not summarized executive reports, or they're not getting to the right levels of detail. And then lastly, when it comes to that response, quite often when we look at a SOC service, the SOC providers that are delivering a SOC service for any kind of containment, mitigation, response to help recover, requires an additional incident response retainer. So there's some of the challenges. So I'll hand over to Brian now to look at how we can help address and resolve those challenges through our MDR, CyberFire MDR service and platform.
Thank you, Rich. And that sets the stage nicely, I think, when you look at those challenges in terms of, those challenges really informed the thinking around the service design and what the objectives were of the service that was being created. So just summarizing really the service objectives of CyberFire MDR One is that, historically, putting in place security monitoring infrastructure and services has taken a long time. Very often, organizations, they're 6 months into a project, whether it's in-house or even sometimes with third parties, and they're still not getting the value. So we really wanted to have a service that is a true kind of turnkey deployment, rapid integration. So objective being that the service can integrate into any environment in 4 weeks or less. Rich talked about the unpredictability and the costs of typical ingestion charges, events per second, gigabytes per day. Very often organizations don't actually know how much log data they need to take in, or they feel constrained that they can't take in all of the logs that they need because of the cost implications. So we really wanted to find a solution that ended expensive and unpredictable SIEM costs. Thirdly, an MDR service is only as good as the detection. You can ingest all the logs you want, but if you're not finding the actual threats manifesting in the environment, then you're not really getting that detection and risk reduction and ability to respond that you need from such a service. So high fidelity threat detection is absolutely key and fundamental to the service. Another problem you often see is, and Rich touched on, is noise. Too many alerts, dozens or even hundreds of alerts per day in some cases. You want to be able to take the signal from the noise, maximize the clarity of actually seeing the real threats in the environment. So we really wanted a service that only delivers prioritized and high quality alerts, and also provide full incident response around that. And so not just handing over the problem to the customer, but actually finding a way to help and guide through the entire incident process. And then finally, a lot of things come to light when you're running an MDR service around either weaknesses in the threat exposure of the customer's environment and the organization's environment, or even ability to expand the scope of what's been monitoring, what logs you're looking at, the detections, etc. So one of the objectives is not just to have a service that stands still, but one that really actively encourages the ongoing improvement of the organization's security as well. So with that in mind, CyberFire MDR was designed and implemented and has been running successfully for a number of years across a large client base. And now we're extending that offering out to all the markets in which Integrity360 operates. So effectively making CyberFire MDR available across the EMEA region. So just running down quickly through what are the key service features, and then we get into detail on some of the key aspects of the service. So all supported logs are included in the cost of the service. So there's no additional charge for an additional SIEM platform or ingestion charges relating to it. So if it's part of the supported log sources that we take in, then all that's included in the service. Obviously, threat detection, triage, analysis, investigation is a core part of the service, including high fidelity, low noise, actionable response alerting, which I talked about earlier as being a key objective of the service. There's also a lot of work done to really understand the customer's incident response processes, and all that's mapped out up front so that the service and how it integrates into that customer's incident response processes is all defined and architected into the service. As mentioned, critical live incident support and root cause investigation for all cases. Because we're only raising the really important cases, then we also make sure to do root cause for all of those. So it's really clear how it happened, when it happened, and how it was resolved. We also recognize that in some cases, an organization may have a need for wider full major incident response support. And so that's included as part of the service. And the incident can even be relating to an aspect that isn't even covered by the service. So it's literally just a incident response emergency team available on standby under tight SLA 24/7 in case the organization needs that additional support. Also, you can have the best detection rules and engineering in the world, but there's no substitute also for complementing that and enhancing that with analyst-driven threat hunting. And so that's integrated into the service. So as well as the, I guess, reactive detections that are implemented, there's also proactive threat hunting going on, highly relevant to the customer's environment and the ongoing threats in the landscape that are emerging day to day. The service doesn't stand still, so the team is continuously developing new detectors, new detection rules, new types of log sources that can be incorporated into the service. We also include canary honeypot monitoring as standard. So as standard, 2 canary honeypots are implemented, and then if there is a need for additional ones, they can also be optionally added as well. As we know, canary honeypots and deception technologies are a great way to detect post-breach activity within your environment. We also provide security guidance on defense threats. So if we, as part of the service, uncover defense gaps in the environment, whether those are vulnerabilities or misconfigurations or other gaps in the security posture, we will raise those as issues as part of the service, and we'll track them on an ongoing basis to ensure that the organization can continually mature its defenses. We also do continuous service improvements, looking for scope for expanding the monitoring, improving the detection capabilities. In order to demonstrate both, between us and the direct client, but also within the organization, we provide very rich executive and case reporting on a monthly basis. And every customer gets an assigned, named customer success representative whose responsibility is to work closely with the customer on an ongoing basis, help with the reporting, act as an escalation point, and make sure that that continuous improvement is implemented. Also, all of the data, all of the alerting, all of the information around the service and what's going on in the environment is available through a customer portal, accessible 24/7. And we also have some additional modules. So we have an enhanced reporting module. So as standard, all logs are retained for a minimum of 3 months. However, if organizations need to retain logs and other information and telemetry for a longer period for compliance or other reasons, then we have an optional reporting module that can enhance that to provide those compliance use cases or for other reporting requirements. We also have an identity leak detection service available as an optional module as part of the service to do dark web monitoring for the likes of credential leaks and threat actor mentions in order to monitor that external environment. So we have kind of complementary to the internal monitoring, also the external monitoring, because very often identity leakage can result in a compromise down the road. And as I mentioned, the ability to add additional honeypots if you want to expand the scope of that deception monitoring as well. So a rich set of features available as part of the service. Core to the service is the detection engineering, and there is a dedicated team responsible for detection engineering. And what they take care of is they're always doing threat research. What are the latest threats in the environment across different industry verticals, in different regions, and in order to make sure that our detection library is up to date with the evolving threats in the environment. They go on to develop and deploy those detectors on the platform. They do ongoing maintenance because very often detections need to be maintained. They can't just set and forget. They need to be maintained. They need to be evolved. And in some cases, they need to be retired as well. And very often the detection engineering team are an extra layer of support during incident analysis as well, because of their deep understanding of the detections and the telemetry around it. In terms of the detection capability, so people might ask, so you're integrating into the environment, what do you do? So, and if a customer and an organization has existing security detection technologies, and what's the role of those technologies? So the service can integrate both with detection technologies, and we have the concept of alert on alert use cases. So we take any detections from detection technology in the environment into the CyberFire MDR platform and service. However, the majority of the detectors are actually specific use cases that we've developed, and therefore extremely complementary to the, I guess, the industry detection technologies out there. So the service is way more than just responding to alerts from existing technologies, but brings a lot of our own threat detection research, detection engineering, research, and intellectual property in order to provide much wider and deeper and high fidelity detection capability. And very often we can correlate the detection technology alerting with the additional detection engineering we've done from our own sources in order to get a better insight into the context of a particular alert from the detection technology and whether it's a true positive or potentially a false positive as well. So we have a significant detection layer. We've got over 1,300 in-house detectors for malicious activity across, DNS and Active Directory audit activity and endpoint detections, and dozens of other types of detectors for anomalous authentication activity. So a full wide range of complementary detections on top of, as I said, the alert and alert from other standardized detections platforms that may be in the environment. So what does the SOC monitor as part of the service? So we have the likes of the, alerting coming from traditional platforms, firewalls, EDR, email solutions, cloud, web application firewalls, and so forth. All of the main detection technology you might see out there. But then we layer in then our additional other telemetry and our detectors around those to provide a much richer detection and high fidelity detection capability as part of the service. Now moving on then to the response capability. So human intelligence is still key. Yes, of course, we've got great detection engineering, we've got great tools, and then we also, as with probably every other service provider and vendor in the space, is leveraging machine learning and AI to help accelerate and improve the capabilities and the speed of response that we can deliver. However, there is a high focus on informed decision making and providing contextual information as part of the service. So before we respond to a situation and a threat, there's a high level of quality control around what we've investigated, what we've found, and the information that we then communicate with the customer. So there are multiple reviews by a range of experts within the business, and a lot of quality control ongoing in the background on the analyst investigations. And sometimes we get asked, how quick can you respond? How quick can we get an answer? And there is a balance here, right? Because if you respond too quickly, then you can fall into a kind of or just pass on an alert that's come in and expect the customer then to try and figure out what's going on. Versus, so if you spend a little bit more time on the investigation and the tuning and making sure, doing quality control around the investigation and the response activity, you get a much lower risk of false positives and a bit more detail. So we put a lot of importance as part of the service to find that balance between time to alert and the investigation time to get that balance right. So in terms of the SLAs, then if something is deemed high priority, then we've got a 1 hour response time. And then, as the criticality and the threat, I guess, the magnitude decreases, then there's a bit more bit more time involved in terms of investigating and responding, but making sure that particularly for those high priority issues that we can respond in a timely manner to be able to contain the threat. So all alerts are reviewed, escalated. We have a dedicated response team, and all cases are owned and managed by the response team and are tracked to closure. And we provide regular follow-ups, and we work very closely with the client in terms of responding to these types of incidents. So basically, the detection engine matches a rule pattern in the logs and raises the alert. The response engineer reviews it and basically triages whether it should be false positive or not, then moves on. If it goes into further investigation, it goes into a deeper investigation, looking across multiple log sources, and even then can be determined potentially to be a false positive, in which case it's closed. Otherwise, if there's more information needed, there may be communications, or there is a request to initiate containment. And then after confirmation with the customer and the incident is closed, we'll close the alert ourselves. So alert and case investigation can come from multiple sources. We can raise them ourselves from threat hunting activities that I mentioned earlier. The client can actually raise a query and say they suspect something, and we can investigate that as a case. We also have threat intelligence feeding in and providing contextual information, and that can provide a match with an indicator of compromise we're seeing in the environment that can drive a case creation as well. Or then finally, the standard detection can trigger based on findings within the logs themselves. So all of those can drive activities that get assigned to a response engineer to work on the case and drive it to closure. Just showing a little bit of insight then on the platform itself. So the solution includes the platform for the shipping and ingesting of the logs, a detection engine, and the interface for the alert and case management. So within the client environment, which can be on-prem, cloud, or hybrid, we deploy our CyberFire server. It takes log sources and ships them off to our cloud-based data lake. And also, if the customer has the enhanced reporting module, that gets deployed within the customer's environment as well. Once the logs are being shipped to the data lake, then our detection engine does its magic on the information and triggers alerts into the workbench of the analyst on the response team, which is also regularly enriched with reputation services and other threat intelligence enrichment, and feeds that alert management process I talked about earlier. In terms of the log sources we support, we integrate with well over 100 different systems, pretty much all of the main products, vendors, and solutions that you might see in a typical environment, and many more as the atypical ones we integrate with. The support and the integration depends on the log source. Some log sources are more useful than others. Some have more depth and context and have more detection value than others. So we support to the level that we think is appropriate. One of the other key things we do as well is we don't just take the logs in and then and implement detection around them. We actually monitor for basically the integrity of the log sources themselves to make sure they're coming in. So we actually monitor that. So if for example some log sources go offline, that also gets created as a case, and we work to resolve that as well with the customer, because obviously if a log source goes offline for any reason, then you're flying blind in the environment, which is also a threat. So in terms of reporting then, we strive to thoroughly investigate all alerts and cases and make sure that the management reports are appealing, concise, easy to understand. So we look, we provide information around, what has driven the alerts, what detections we've received, which ones have been client queries, which have come from deception, canary alerts, which have come from threat hunts, or matches from threat intelligence. So you can get a visibility of where all of the alerts are coming from, which ones have been investigated, triaged out or investigated, and of those, what was the outcome? How many are open? How many were false positives, which were true? And then right through to which ones ultimately had a business impact or didn't as well. So you can see very, very clearly that whole stream from the original source right through to the business outcome. You can also see that over a trend. So you can see by month things like how many events have been collected. So in this case, over 14 billion events in the month of December. And of those, how many detections were fired, how many vendor detections were also included, and then how many resulted in analyst investigations, and again, which were true positives and which were true positives with an impact. So you can see that both, for each individual month, and you can see the trend over time as well. We also have the additional modules that we talked about. So identity leak detection, marking the dark web, monitoring the dark web for accounts that may have been leaked, scanned on a continuous basis every day, and investigating those findings and making sure that we filter out any noise or false positives that might be in there. The enhanced reporting module, a lot of customers like that because it enables them to satisfy additional reporting and or compliance use cases that aren't specific just to threat monitoring and security monitoring, detection and response. So they can then have both the compliance use cases, reporting use cases, and the threat monitoring cases all included in the service. So the enhanced reporting module goes beyond just focusing on the security monitoring, but looks at the compliance purposes through log processing. So we set up, monitor, and maintain the log ingestion and the data lake to ensure that the information is available for the customer's use cases. So instead of just shipping all the logs to our data lake, we also ship all the data to the customer's environment, so they also have that longer term storage, and then we can fine tune that and report on that and help the customer with the reporting around that on an ongoing basis. Similarly, for identity leak, we have automated scans and triggers, verification, and ultimately do the same type of response activity that we do for the internal monitoring as well. And then finally, getting on to the pricing model, we try to keep it simple. So it's simply per endpoint pricing, regardless of the events per second or the gigabytes per day of logs. It's a sliding scale, so the price per endpoint does reduce as the volume increases, which makes the service quite suitable, not just for smaller business, but even mid-range and large enterprises. And so we have some customers on the service who have endpoints in the range of tens of thousands of endpoints. An endpoint is typically a server, a workstation, a laptop, or a cloud virtual server if those endpoints are running in cloud. So it's a very straightforward pricing model, and a lot of customers like the simplicity of that and the predictability of that as well. So that's my overview of the service. So I hope that was useful. And now I'll hand back to Rich for the summary.
Thank you very much, Brian. And yeah, for diving into an overview of the service and our CyberFire platform and its features and capabilities. So I think the easiest way to summarize it is to really go back to those scenarios that we looked at the very start. So obviously we had two scenarios, one in terms of building your own SOC and the challenges there, but also in terms of where you've outsourced your SOC. With similar but contrasting issues, really around cost, around the volume and the quality of the alerts, making sure that you've got the coverage and that's continuous, addressing the challenge of the deficit in terms of people and skills, but also in terms of response. So if we look at scenario one, where we're sort of building, maturing your own SOC, well, actually CyberFire can very much step in there to address that challenge. If we can click on there, Brian. So taking away a lot of those challenges in terms of the expensive SIEM license, the lack of alerts. Sorry, Brian, if you can move the animation on there. Thank you very much. And really address that in terms of pricing being per endpoint, so not based on ingestion, which removes that challenge of log storage, log volumes that make organizations nervous about extending their security monitoring across the entire environment. It also looks to bring alerts in terms of with context, and importantly with the hypothesis and with the view and recommendations of our expert team of analysts. Whereas we look at in that example of building a SOC, having the quality and the effectiveness and efficacy of those those detections, we have that detection team that is constantly tuning and providing new detections across all of the log sources that we're collecting. We also have resiliency in terms of those log sources that we're monitoring to make sure that nothing is being missed and there's not a misconfiguration in the environment. And then lastly, when it comes to addressing that team, as I mentioned, we have an extensive team of MDR experts, which is very much a specialized role in being able to understand the alerts, understanding the type of threats, the activities, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, so that we can analyze those once they've been detected and really move to the very next stage, which is how we can respond, how we can contain, mitigate, and recover. If we look at the second scenario there, where the SOC services are outsourced, as you say, similar challenges in terms of dozens of alerts, lots of false positives, where alerts are being where cases are being created. Those alerts lack context to help and guide the investigation process. When we look at reports, being very verbose and not meaningful, and also there's that need for an incident response retainer to be able to do that containment and mitigation. Looking at CyberFire in that scenario, we can address all of those challenges. We expect, rather than alerts being in the tens to hundreds per day, which is completely unmanageable, we can expect each customer to only have 20 to 25 alerts per month. And that's not because that we're not detecting a broad range of activity and threats. It's because they are being investigated and false positives very much being tuned out. And then when alerts are investigated, they're only sent and only raised with customers when entirely necessary, which is obviously very important. Again, that we're not flooding the MDR platform with false positives, and where false positives are identified, they are not flooded to the customer. Where we are raising alerts and incidents, very importantly, we have that context, we have that that's provided. When we look at our MDR reporting that Brian covered there, it's concise, it's targeted to meet the requirements to be effective at executive summary level, but also with the details of the service. And then also, and lastly, but probably most importantly, the team is there to assist in critical incidents. So as Brian talked about, incident response is a feature of the service. It is not something that that needs to be procured and managed elsewhere. And having an integrated incident response capability means that all of that data is instantly provided to our teams. So just in terms of a wrap up, we've talked through the scenarios, but if I had to call out some key takeaways, it's really where CyberFire can assist. It's really removing that burden of false positives, and allows you to get on the front foot against threat actors and against the threats and incidents in the environment. We can help ensure that we're monitoring what matters, and importantly, the entire scope of the environment that needs monitoring. And that's something that our team is there to guide, to make sure that we're constantly improving the service, constantly improving your coverage and your security capability. And hand in hand with that, CyberFire removes the constraints of log ingestion costs, which is one of the main complaints that we hear about SIEM platforms and SOC services that are related to that ingestion model. As Brian talked about, our pricing is purely per endpoint, and that with no impact on the log volume ingested, so we can comfortably ingest everything that's required, providing predictability. I talked about the reports, calling those out in terms of being tailored to executive summaries, but it's also the proactive defense that is provided, both in terms of threat hunting, but I think one of the really important parts is around those defense threats. So the team are responding to alerts, but as we're responding to alerts, as we're combing through the data, our team invariably identify things, as Brian talked about, like misconfigurations, potential misactivity that's occurring that itself is not worthy of an alert, but they are provided, and it could be things that are required to enhance and improve the detection capabilities, and that is provided by the team and managed on an ongoing basis and tracked to make sure that we are helping you and guiding you to improve your security capability. So really, that's the a review and overview of the service and the capability that we can now bring to the EMEA market in terms of our turnkey solution, which really leaves us probably to the last piece, which is to touch upon our Q&A. So we do have some questions that have come in over the course, actually probably more than we're going to be able to answer here, as there's 7 questions in the queue to be answered. So Brian, if we could just move on to the Q&A holding page, I think, but I will dive into some of those questions. So the first question is, how does the pricing compare to services using standalone SIEM platform for security monitoring? Brian, if you want to take that one.
Sure, yeah. The majority of SIEM platforms use capacity-based pricing, so they use like ingestion charges. But we have done some modeling saying, well, for a typical organization of a particular size, what would be a typical SIEM cost to go with that? And, some providers offer services wrapped, around a SIEM platform, where the customer has to pay for the SIEM license and then the standalone MDR service around it. And what we've seen now, obviously, pricing varies quite a lot, both in terms of SIEM platforms and in terms of, competitor MDR services. But what we've seen is that our CyberFire MDR is very competitive with MDR pricing that's out there that excludes the SIEM costs. So therefore, if you like, the MDR price with SIEM is, competitive with an MDR provider, but then the customer then has to pay for additionally on top of that for a SIEM platform with all of those ingestion charges, additional charges involved. So from that perspective, I think people would be quite surprised and happy with the pricing model when they compare it to other offerings in the market involving a standalone SIEM.
Thank you. The next question here is actually there's a bit of a compliment. So it looks like a very comprehensive offering. Thank you to whoever asked that question. But the actual question is, do we get access to our raw log data to query ourselves? And if so, does that cost extra?
So that comes with the optional enhanced reporting module. So if the customer wants to do their own enhanced reporting, then they can buy the enhanced module. They do get access to a customer portal where they can see all of the reporting and all of the data, but the actual query, the ability to run additional queries, etc., comes with the enhanced reporting module.
Yeah, and I think it's important to call out there that there's an enhanced reporting module. But again, there is no limit on the ingestion costs. We effectively hold these on part of the platform that is deployed in the customer environment, and customer provides storage, whether that's in the cloud or whether it's on-premise or virtualized in some way. But again, there is no ingestion cost associated with that data and the ability to be able to comb through and analyze that data as you wish. Joe, we're going to run out of time, so probably won't get to answer all of the questions. But there's 2 questions that have a similar form here. So what SIEM platform is your data lake based upon. So I don't mind answering that, Brian. So obviously the CyberFire MDR platform overall is a proprietary technology that is joining together all of the analyst workbench, all of the automation that we carry out, all of the detections that we provide, as the AI capabilities built in to help analyze threats, and on top, as part of that, is obviously powered by a data lake, which, yes, in terms of the answer to the other questions, it is based upon Elastic, that allows us to have that entirely scalable log collection architecture. And so one last question is around pricing and cost, Brian. So is pricing only per endpoint, or is there another price for firewalls or other network devices?
No, it's purely based on the endpoints I mentioned. So servers, workstations, laptops, and cloud workloads, but not we don't charge for additional network appliances and things like that.
No, indeed. And it's important to call out that actually our pricing is based, yes, it's on endpoints, but actually what we're looking at is we are pricing it on the assets that need protecting. And obviously things like firewalls, yes, have broad coverage, but that is feeding in the data that allows us to protect those assets. Is probably the best way to look at it. And as Brian called out, really it's around laptops, servers, cloud workloads, and network devices that we are protecting. So again, just going back, that challenge being around log ingestion volumes, that entirely disappears when it comes to CyberFire MDR. So I think that's it. There was a couple of more questions that we will answer on the follow-up. So it just leaves me to thank all of you for joining this morning. Hopefully it's potentially not morning where you are, as we're probably got some attendees from across the globe joining us. And say thank you very much to Brian Martin, who joined me today to walk through our CyberFire service and its capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.